Yeah, crown me king, tell them heathens.
Shalom, and welcome to another edition here on the Genesis 49ers page, where we say no to vague interpretations and we give thorough breakdowns. Genesis 49ers, we back, but never moving backwards. Here to put Israel on the atlas. Y'all know the slogan. We say no to vague interpretations and give thorough breakdowns. Today's topic is going to be a goodie. It's going to be awesome. Get your pens, your pads, get ready to take notes. We're going over Babylon to Timbuktu, from Babylon to Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor. Many Israelites, many brothers, many sisters, many of you at home viewing this video now, you own a copy of this book. But how many of you, brothers and sisters, actually cracked the book open and read it cover to cover? Now, today we're not going over the whole book, but we're going to bring forth some highlights from this book to get you interested so you can go ahead and read the entire thing. He makes poignant points regarding the Jews of Portugal, the Jews of Ghana, the Jews of Angola, Senegal, the Sahara, and so on and so forth. And this information is pertinent to your walk and your faith because it's evidence to who we are and our nationality and our identity. We have tangible evidence because he's quoting Arabic scholars like Edrizi. He's quoting Nahum Sloots, who went to North Africa and different African countries and actually did interviews in his time in the early 19th century. You understand? He's quoting Alan H. Garvey that did the scholarship and did the research regarding these Jews in Africa. So this book is very pertinent to the Israelite community. First thing I want to touch on is his excerpt on leprosy, because a lot of people will say, how are you guys the people of the book? How are you the Israelites? We thought they looked like Russell Crowe because we watched the commandments and that's how they're portrayed. Oh, those people call themselves Jews or Ashkenazis in the land of Israel. They're the real Jews and they're white. So how can you be a Jew because you're black? How could you be Israelite because your skin color, you have melanin? This is what's being said. This is the rhetoric that's being spewed. Because in your mind, you think that the people of the book, the Israelites, the children of Jacob, the 12 tribes, have to look like Russell Crowe, have to look like Netanyahu, however you say that guy's name from Israel, right? That's what you think. That's what's in your mind. That's why we have to cast down these imaginations. Because if that was true regarding the ancient Israelites, then this wouldn't be a thing. Leprosy. Now, leprosy is the changing of your skin when you change the skin white, when you make it white, right? A disease that makes your skin white. So pages 23 of Babylon to Timbuktu says, when God wanted to show Moses a miracle, he turned his hand white as snow. Then he turned it back again to its original color, being black. In ancient Israel, when a man had a white spot in his skin, or white or yellow hair, or white skin somewhat reddish, he was pronounced unclean. All people who were victims of this shameful disease were isolated outside of the camp or city. Those that had leprosy were called lepers, and they had to shut unclean. All people in the ancient world who had yellow hair and leprosy were despised and segregated. This is one reason the white supremacists discriminate against the black people today. Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses and defamed his character because he married an Ethiopian woman. Before I keep going, he's right for the most part, but if you were born like that, you would be a clean leopard and you could come amongst the people, or you could come to the temple. That's one part that if you read the Levitical law, if you're clean leopards are people that are born with the white skin and born with that texture of hair or color of hair. But anyway, back into the quote. It says, Ethiopian women, Moses Miriam and Aaron spoke against Moses and defamed his character because he married an Ethiopian woman. As a punishment, God struck Miriam with leprosy and she turned white as snow. Now, many people have deceived themselves in thinking that Miriam and Aaron spoke against her because she was a black woman, which is a doctrine. Oh, it's because he went with a black woman. But this is not the case because Miriam, Aaron, and Moses were all black people. Exactly. They spoke against Moses because the Ethiopian woman was of a different religion, which is not true either. It's more of a case that back then and now today we were not supposed to intermarry, and Moses obviously intermarried. He was 40 years before he went on a mission to release the Most High's chosen people from Egypt. He was 40 years entrenched in the Egyptian doctrine and way, and according to Josephus, he married a Cushite woman or Ethiopian woman, if you will. It says the color issue did not exist in our day, and that's true. The color issue didn't exist back then. It's very modern. It's very modern. It didn't exist 4,000 years ago. So that wouldn't even be a thing. Oh, you married a black, that wouldn't be a thing. And again, that's from Babylon to Timbuktu, pages 23 to 24. The second part of leprosy, he talks about Naaman, right? And we know about Naaman and then Gehazi, the curse of Gehazi. So let's get into it. It says this story, Naaman was the captain of the Syrian army. He acquired leprosy, boils and whiting of the skin. He wanted to be cured. Then he heard about Elisha the prophet. Elisha told him to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. Naaman obeyed and he was cured. A reward was offered Elisha, but he refused it. A servant of Elisha named Gehazi wanted the reward that his master Elisha refused. Then Gehazi ran and looked for Naaman when he found him and asked him for the reward and said that his master had sent him. This, of course, was a lie. When Gehazi returned to Elisha, Elisha said, I know you have gotten garments, olive yards, and all kinds of wealth by means of subterfuge. Therefore, the leprosy that Naaman had will leave presence a leper as white as snow. This type of leprosy affected the reproductive organs, genes, and chromosomes that determine hereditary characteristics in his body. This meant all his children would produce white offspring, even though he was a black man at first. This was the curse of Gehazi, right? So Babylon to Timbuktu, page 25. And if his skin's changing white and his seed and his posterity will become white, that would mean that he was a person of color. He had melanin in his skin, a lot of melanin, because so-called Caucasians have melanin in their skin, but it's very, very small amounts. It's not big enough to see. It's not enough of it to see. So this lets you know that the ancient Israelites and the ancient people of the book were melanated people. It's that simple. There wouldn't be a thing called leprosy. It wouldn't be an issue. It wouldn't be looked at as something as a disease if it was the normal, everybody walked around white as snow, you know. So that's out. Next slide. Now, the classification of race. Classification of race. Because a lot of our people will also say that, oh, you can't be a Jew, you can't be an Israelite, and you're like, okay, why do you feel that way? Because you're an African. How are you a Jew? How are you an Israelite if you're African? Because that word African has been used to basically be a guise for our race. It's really ethnocide because it's killing our ethnic roots and who we are and our identity. That's what was brought into place. And a lot of people scoff at the Bible and scoff at the Israelites because what they will say is, oh, you're following the white man. But you call yourself African. You're proud to call yourself African. Some of you brothers and some of you sisters, if I say anything about African or we're not African, you're going to get upset because it's sacrilegious to say anything against Africa or the African terminology used in a manner that like it's a race. But guess where that came from? You want to say the Israelites are following the white man, but you're following the white man because that classification came from white people. The first time Africa was in use was by the Romans, man. And it didn't denote the whole continent of what we call nowadays Africa. It was just dealing with Libya because you had the Afar people there, right? On the northern strip of Africa, what we call Africa today. Fast forward, you have Blumenbach. Blumenbach came with the 5-race theory. And back then, they would call Africa Ethiopia, and then that became Africa. Everything's black is African. That's how that came into play. So, Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 20 to 21 says, the ancient people did not classify races according to skin color, like the modern nations of Europe and America. Excuse me. The ancients, including the Greeks and Romans, identified people according to their national or tribal names. They used such names as Visigoths, Vandals, Saxons, and Ethiopians, Carthaginians, Jews, Arabs, Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, and Moors. They did not use the term Negro, which is a modern term to refer to black races, or the word Caucasian to refer to the white races. Dividing the world along a color line was an idea that originated with the white supremacists in Europe after the Renaissance. The Europeans did not have any great civilization immediately after the fall of Greece and Rome. During the Middle Ages, the black nations of Africa and Asia had the greatest political, economical, educational, and military influence in the world. At this time, Europe existed in a state of darkness for 1,000 years, and in the 17th century and later, Europe began to emerge out of the slough of ignorance, and certain Germans and others conceived of themselves as belonging to a superior race. Johann F. Blumenbach, a German, 1752 to 1840, was the first to divide humanity on the basis of skin color. Up to this time, no such attempts had been made. His classification set up a color line to the detriment of later generations. Why does it say to the detriment of later generations? Because it's confusion. It's a covering cast over who we really are. Because now you say, where do I come from? Who am I? What is my culture? What is my identity? You just say African. Well, African is not ancient, so it doesn't go far. It doesn't tell you anything. But what we're here to tell you is, you American blacks, you Hispanics, you Native Americans, your line goes back to the ancient Israelites. You are authentic Israelites. That's not ambiguous. African is very ambiguous. It is based off skin color and racism. So he was the first to divide humanity on the basis of skin color. Up to this time, no such attempts had been made. His classification set up a color line to the detriment of later generations. Mr. Blumenbach classified 5 chief races of mankind: the Caucasian, the Mongolian, the Ethiopian, and American, and Malayan. Moreover, he considered the Caucasian to be the original race. Blumenbach, the anthropologist, named the whites after the Caucasus Mountains. These originated there. Blumenbach was a racist, and so was J.A. Gobineau. A third man by the name of H.S. Chamberlain wanted to advance the supremacy of the white Nordic race and its culture. These men attributed psychological value and importance to race. Wrote in his book Race Psychology in 1931, any disposition on our part to withhold from some race the right to a free and full development must be taken as an indication of rationalization on the account of race prejudice, and such an attitude is inexcusable in an intelligent populace. Again, that's from Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 20 to 21. So we see where the classification of race came from. You Negroes, you brothers, you sisters, you using that terminology and the same system and classification as Blumenbach. They don't come from our forefathers. They don't come from your people. That doesn't. That comes from Blumenbach. So on this slide, we're going to discuss the Yehudi, or the Jews in West Africa. There was a Jewish tribe there was a Jewish tribe called Rechab, which crossed the Red Sea and migrated to the extreme point of the western Sudan. Source, Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 88. The oral traditions which are everywhere found concerning the early Jewish history of this country are beginning to find confirmation in Arab writings and even in inscriptions of Jewish origin. We are beginning to learn now of a great migration in the time of Muhammad or even before, in the famous year of the elephant. Many Jews were forced into Arabia. We are told of Yehud Kabar, the Rechab, a tribe or shepherds and agriculturalists, intrepid horsemen who at one time camped on the shores of the Red Sea, who finally crossed the Sudan and penetrated to the farthest point of the Sahara. To them, the Moorish natives, as well as the Arabs and Negroes, attribute the founding of the first empires, the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of social and economic regime which still survives in all Saharan communities. And the source for that is Travels in North Africa by Nahum Sluice, page 344. So it says to the furthest point of the Sahara. This is going into West Africa. This is showing you the Rechab, or the Jews, going deep into Africa, deep into West Africa, having the rapport of being these intelligent men who built up the infrastructure through the Sahara. Those two sources, again, Babylon Timbuktu, page 88, and Travels in North Africa by Nahum Sluice, page 344. Don't sleep on Nahum, man. If you got a chance, an opportunity to purchase his book, purchase it. That book should be on your shelf. That should be a part of your library. That should be a part of your collection. It's a huge, fundamental part of our history. He made this voyage in the early 19th century and wrote down what he discovered when he went there. And now Nahum Sluice is a Ashkenazi Jew, but he did not let that deter his pen when he wrote down what he saw in Africa. And he saw remnants of these Jews, and he gave an account, and he told you what color their skin was. But that's not all. It gets better. This presentation, like I said, is going to be awesome. And it's going to make you pick up this book, Babylon and Timbuktu, because a lot of you brothers and sisters, you scoff at this book. But in this book, he's quoting historians, man. It's well cited. It's cited well. So right here, West African Jews. Dr. Allah H. Gabi postulates that the black Jews were on the West African coast from Senegal to Angola, and the Jews, were driven to this area from Central Sudan by Muslim propagandism. Having a knowledge of black Jews in the United States, Dr. Gabi arrived at this conclusion. These facts have peculiar significance when the presence of Judaism among American Negroes is to be considered. Hundreds of thousands were brought to America from Western Africa during the days of the traffic beginning nearly 400 years ago. How much more in danger than other Negroes are being raided by war parties and sold as slaves, it may be considered certain that many partially Judaized Negroes were among the slaves brought to America. How many of them might still hold some Jewish customs is another question. And the sources from Babylon to Timbuktu, pages 152. So Dr. Allah H. Gabi understood that these American Negroes are tied to these Jews. They're tied to these Jews. So that's our ancestry. Just saying you're African, that's ambiguous. That doesn't tell you anything. That's why that term was to our detriment. That Israel ceased from the remembrance of men. Authenticity. At the time that Joseph was viceroy of Egypt, his brothers could not distinguish him from black Egyptians because Joseph was black. So again, it's just more proof that the ancient Israelites were black, man. They were melanated, people of color, or what have you, right? Because they couldn't pick him out between the Egyptians, and we know the Egyptians were black, so you can't play that game. After Pharaoh promulgated the cruel decree to extirpate the Hebrew males, only a black Moses would have been able to be concealed effectively for any length of time among black Egyptians. Yeah, because remember, he passed as a child that was born to an Egyptian, pretty much. So how would he blend in if he's a Caucasian amongst a black race? Because all the black males were supposed to be killed at that time if you were Hebrew. How would he just blend in? It says that Daniel had a dream of an anthropomorphous god with woolly hair, that biblical leprosy laws of the time could apply only to a very dark people with black hair. The black Jews of India, Abyssinia, which is Ethiopia, and West Africa consider themselves the original Jews because of the purity of their Israelite blood. This has been stated by Alan H. Godby. And the source for this is Babylon and Timbuktu, page 36. So these Israelites claim to be the original Jews. The ones in Ethiopia, India, and West Africa. And they happen to be people of color, melanated people, quote unquote black people. They fit the description. The black Jews of Portugal. In the country called the Gabon, near the Congo, there were black Jews known as the Bavumbu. Some writers call them by various names such as Mavumbo, Mayomba, Mavumba, and Mavumbu. Abi Proyart, a French writer, says that these Jews held the coast of Lyongo between the Congo River and the Rio Muni in Gabon. In 1776, their country began about 60 miles from the coast and extended north from the Congo, about 200 miles. In their appearance, these black Jews are hardly distinguishable from the other Africans. So you can't say that these Jews are Caucasian or they look like the Ashkenazi Jews. No, these are black people. These are people of color. They can hardly distinguish them from the Native Africans. However, they observed some Jewish ceremonies and lived in separate communities, not considering themselves Native Africans. Look, we not with these people that are here. We're not a part of them. We the Israelites, the Jews. That's how they carried themselves. This was in 1776. It says the villages of these Jews are situated along the Lyongo coast for more than 100 miles, even south of the Congo River. Godby writes that when they interrogated in regard to their origins, some of these Jews said they migrated from the south, probably Angola, some from the north, probably Nigeria, some from the other side of the mountains, perhaps Ethiopia. Like the Portuguese Jews, that the Bavumbu were very active in commerce. When David Livingstone was in Africa, he discovered a settlement of educated blacks about the year 1847. They were located inland about 200 miles from the Lyongo coast and are known as the Jews of Angola. These black Jews were active in commerce, eager to learn, and possessed much knowledge of Portuguese history and law. In their commercial enterprises, these Jews penetrated inland 100 miles from the coast and were known as clerks and writers. Livingstone considered these Jews to be deportees from Portugal. Why? Because remember, in 1492, 1496, you had the Jews were expelled from Portugal and Spain. So they were expelled to the Guinean Coast, West Africa. They was expelled to Sao Thome. Some fled to Africa. So you see these. He's seeing these. Livingstone is seeing the remnants of these people. He's seeing the remnants. And what color are they? These people couldn't be distinguished from Africans. So we know that these were melanated people of color. You can't get around that. And this proves you can't just throw everybody in one basket and call them African because they look Negroid or they have dark skin. That's confusion. 5 races. How are there only 5 races? There's 18 nations mentioned in the Bible. And if you go other ancient records, it doesn't work that way. So it says, Livingstone considered these Jews to be deportees from Portugal. St. Paul de Leonda began, like Sao Thome, as a penal colony for the punishment of criminals. In Portugal, many of these black Jews were considered criminals. Also, many of these black Jews of the land of Angola, it is said, came from Sao Thome. All available evidence indicates that the Jews of Angola coast were Portuguese Jewish outcasts. And the source, Babylon of Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor, page 129. And here's a source. This is a little soft song to put on your course, put on your meat. You know what I'm saying? The Jews of Portugal are very dark. So if anybody is still fighting in your mind, oh no, the Jews look white. They're blanco. Este blanco. That's true. Right here. Here's a source right here. Another source. Even though we just read that they were indistinguishable from the native Africans, and they separate themselves from them, but they looked similar to them. They were Jews. And according to James Pritchard, Natural History of Man, page 145, the Jews of Portugal are very dark. So it's irrefutable. There's nothing to say after this. I'm telling y'all, man, read Babylon and Timbuktu. A lot of you brothers own this book. Never read it. Mine full of highlights. So, again, the Portuguese Jews are dark. They're melanated. They're people of color. The Catholic terror. This is what happened to these Portuguese Jews. It says, by the edict of King Manuel of Portugal in 1496, banishing the Jews from Portugal, all Jews were to be out of Portugal by October 1497. However, considering this matter, he decided to Christianize the Jews, fearing the loss of valuable population. He wanted to continue use of their knowledge and services. He concluded that the only way the Jews could be tolerated in his country was to force them into the Christian faith. In March 1497, a command was proclaimed throughout Portugal for all Hebrew children between 4 and 14 years of age to be brought for baptism. All parents who did not bring their children voluntarily had their children taken away violently by the officials and forced into baptism. Cecil Roth writes, scenes of indescribable horror was witnessed as they were torn away by the royal bailiffs. The latter did not obey their instructions too closely, frequently seizing young people of both sexes up to the age of 20. In many cases, parents smothered their offspring in their farewell embrace. In others, they threw them into wells in order to save them from the disgrace of apostasy, and then killed themselves. Sometimes even old men were dragged to the churches and forcibly baptized by overzealous fanatics. So that's what these Catholic, Christian, Portuguese white males were doing to these black Jews. It was horrible. If you read Deuteronomy 28, Leviticus 26 chapter, you can clearly see these people fitted. They fitted to the T. Because they had to kill their children, man. Because they was afraid to let their children go under the auspice of the Catholic regime. Reading on, it says, horrendous conditions like these and much worse compelled many Jews to escape secretly out of the country. These black Jews went to Portuguese colonial possessions in Western Africa. Remember that the Portuguese colonies in Western Africa were Guyana, Sao Thome Islands, Senegal, Angola, and a few islands near the African coast like Principe. During the persecutions in Portugal, thousands of Jews left the country. The Jews were leaving the country in such large numbers that in 1499 and 1531, the kings published a decree forbidding the new Christians, black Jews, from leaving Portugal without special permits. At this time, many Jews became Christians out of fear. Many of them were known as secret Jews, practicing Judaism in secret under the guise of Christianity. Some writers call these Jews nominal Christians because who are Christians in name only, but practice Judaism in secret. In spite of all the prejudice against the black Jews of Portugal, they excelled in all the trades, skills, professions, and businesses. The wealth of the Jews was tremendous. Portugal is a small country about the size of the state of Florida. Nevertheless, in the year 1610, the Jews alone were worth 80 million ducats. The Jews dominated commerce and the export trade, so naturally, the black Jew would engage in commerce and trade in many parts of Africa after they had fled from Portugal. And the source is Babylon and Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor, pages 125 to 126. So let's deal with the Sudanic Jews now. It says the black Jews who migrated to Sudan from the north converged with the Jews migrated from eastern Sudan to the countries of the Niger River. It is a known fact that the Jews and Judaism were in Africa 1500 years before Islam, and that everywhere the Arabs went, the Jews were there. The black Jews guided the Arabs and Moors into Spain and acted as interpreters. When the Muslims came into the Sahara, they found the black Jews stationed on all the trade routes, and I can possibly say that where Mohammedanism is currently prevalent in the Sudan, Judaism once had been dominant. Judaism once had been dominant. This is in Africa. This is in the Sahara. Let you brothers know that Judaism was dominant there. There is much proof and still much more to be revealed by scholars that there existed prior to the slave trade and subsequent to its many Jewish tribes, colonies, subsequent to its many Jewish tribes, colonies, and kingdoms in West Africa. The Moorish writer Leo Africanus informs us of the past existence of a medieval Hebrew state called Camnuria, or Canuria. Two main cities were Camnuri, obviously its capital, and Nigeria, and this state was located north of the Senegal River. According to the Moorish Jew, this black African Hebrew state had vanished by this time. There are two reasons given for the ruin of this kingdom. The intensive sandstorms of the Sahara Desert caused droughts and rendered the cities uninhabitable. 2. The migration of the Fulas or Fubi toward the west, the Kanuri called the Fulas Fayata. These Fulas transmigrated the entire Sudan from the Nile to the Senegal. The Kanuri Jews are now located in central Sudan along trails hundreds of miles north, south, east, and west of Lake Chad, where they migrated from Senegal. It is the conclusion of some scholars that when the Jewish kingdom of Ghana fell, many of the Hebrew tribes established settlements among the African tribes throughout central and western Africa. Thus, the Moorish writer Al-Idrisi of Andalusia, Spain, wrote in the early part of the 12th century about the powerful Hebrew colony of Lumlum. Lumlum was situated about 200 miles west of Timbuktu. The Hebrew merchants were then monopolizing the trade that was concentrated at Timbuktu. Lumlum was entirely Jewish, and she fought wars to maintain her control of trade. Idrisi also said that there were only 2 towns south of the kingdoms of Ghana, and continues, according to what the people of this country report, the inhabitants are Jews. The inhabitants are Jews. Lumlum is a city purported to have inhabitants that were Jews. So reading on, it says, when they had reached the age of puberty, they were branded on the countenance or at least on the temple with fire, leaving identifying marks. All the dwellings in their country were built on the bank of a river, which flowed into the Nile. Idrisi meant the Niger River. It was the belief of the time that the Niger formed an upper reach of the Nile. And that is from Babylon Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor, page 121 to page 122. So more pertinent history about the Sudanic Jews, these Jews that are in Ghana, that's around Ghana, the Senegal Jews. More information about the Jews in the Sahara. I'm telling you, this book, Negroes don't like to read. You have this book on your shelf, it's just collecting dust. There's a lot of source material in here. And again, it's cited well. Now, let's move on to the Niger Bend. It says, it is certain that many black Jews of Portugal, Sao Thome, and Angola, who became victims of the Inquisition and Portuguese persecution, were sold in the slave trade. So that would be fulfillment of Deuteronomy 28 and 68, right? Being sold to our enemies by the way of slave ships, right? There it is. These Jews were victims of the slave trade. It said this Atlantic slave trade lasted more than 400 years, from 1444 to about 1880. So a lot of you people going around thinking the slave trade started in 1619, you're wrong. You had slaves going to the Caribbean and going to Cape Verde hundreds of years before that. Understand that. Understand that. It says 400 years from 1444 to about 1880 in some parts of South America. Some scholars have located black Jews within the entire Niger River Bend. The countries in this territory that have contained black African Jews include the following: Upper Volta, the Ivory Coast, Ghana, Togo, Dahomey, and Nigeria. Joseph Dupuy, concerning the Jews in 1824, says the lands occupied by these people cover a wide extent between Messina and Kabi. Messina is located in Lower Mali, inside the Niger Bend, and Kabi is found in the southern part of the Ivory Coast. So it's clear. It's clear as day that these Jews were all over West Africa. And the source is Babylon and Timbuktu by Rudolph Windsor, page 130. So real quick, let's deal with the birth of Islam. It says Europe remained dormant and inactive for 1,000 years, through the Dark Ages. While the Muslim Empire mastered the civilized, progressive world, let us return now to survey the rise of the Muslim religion and empire in Arabia. When Muhammad was born, many Arabs were still worshiping the sun, stars, spirits, and idols. The Arabs possessed 360 idols, one for each day of the year. Muhammad was born AD 570, 4 years after the death of Emperor Justinian. He was descended from the tribe of KUSH and the family of Hashem. His mentality was prejudiced. In his youth, he was never taught to read or write. 39, but his men with the power of words. But he led his man with the power of imagination. But his imagination was superlative. Excuse me. Muhammad was an extraordinarily handsome man and eloquent and motivating men with the power of his words. In the early years of Muhammad's life, he passed his time as a shepherd boy. We must remember that many successful men have arisen from insignificant and humble conditions. Watching the sun by day and the stars by night left opportunity for Muhammad to contemplate in solitude and reflect on the events and the profundities of the world. After Muhammad became a king, he traveled to remote and intriguing lands. He led his caravans to Persia, Syria, and Egypt, transacting business with merchants of every kind. On his business trips, he met Jews, Christians, and members of other sects. He interrogated them concerning the tenets of their religions. He frequented the environment of the Jews and their rabbis, mostly because they were merchants in an omnipresent ethnic group. Because he could not read or write, his ears were attentive and keen to everything that the Jews related to him. Muhammad learned and extracted much from the Jewish religion and compounded it with his new religion, Islam. So the birth of Islam sprung and came from the Jews because he took all the tenets of our religion, of our way of living, our thought process, and basically made the Islamic religion. So let's deal with beyond the rivers of KUSH. Beyond the rivers of KUSH. It says, from what period can we certify that the existence of black Hebrews in Egypt, and Ethiopia? It is certain that Israelites were in Egypt and Ethiopia during the period of King Takalot of Egypt, the 23rd Tanakh dynasty, about 725 BC, and the prophet Isaiah of Jerusalem, because we read in Isaiah 11:11 that, and it shall come to pass in that day that the Lord shall set his hand again a second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria and from Egypt and from Pathros and from KUSH, which is Ethiopia. In Isaiah 27:13, we get the understanding that the outcasts of Judah are in the land of Egypt. In 1918, it says the prophets is positive that 5 cities with Jews and Egyptian converts will accept the God of Israel or speak the language of Canaan, Hebrew. About 70 years after Isaiah, the prophet Zephaniah in chapter 3, verse 10 says, from beyond the river Ethiopia my suppliants, even the dawn of my disperse shall bring mine offering. Many authorities have agreed that Zephaniah was speaking concerning the Jews who were dispersed and who colonized the region in and around Ethiopia. And that source is Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 76 to 77. Beyond the rivers of KUSH or Ethiopia, That's where the Jews will be found. So when anybody questions, oh, how when did Jews go to Africa? The Zephaniah 3 and 10. Let's go to Zephaniah 3 and 10. It's a fascinating verse. It gives you the history. It tells you that they went deep into Ethiopia and went over the rivers, which would make them penetrate Africa and go westward. Deportation. In the same century, Shishak, the king of Egypt, invaded Palestine. 1 Kings 14 and 25. Without doubt, he must have transported many Jews to Egypt and Ethiopia because he took prisoners with him, and his army consisted of Libyans and Ethiopians. During the late part of the 8th or early part of the 7th century, the Ethiopian general Taharka invaded Palestine and captured more than a few towns. The prophet Isaiah certainly knew what he was talking about when he spoke of the Israelite exiles in Taharka's country at that time. Even the advance of the mighty Assyrian army would motivate many Israelites to take refuge in Egypt, Libya, and Ethiopia. Again, the incursions of the powerful army of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon in the years 608 to 675 into Palestine undoubtedly caused rapid and numerous migratory waves of Israelites to flee into North and East Africa. In Jeremiah 44, verse 1, the prophet addresses the Jews in Egypt and the Jews that lived in Pathros, which is southern Egypt. Jeremiah tells the Jews in the 11th verse that they are not safe from Nebuchadnezzar. This warning would naturally influence many Jews to migrate deeper into Ethiopia in the Sahara Desert. So again, he's explaining and spouting upon how these Jews got to the western part of Africa, right? This is the history during the time of Shishak. You had the Jews during the time of Jeremiah trying to flee the judgment of Nebuchadnezzar, so they would go deeply penetrate Africa to get away from the army of Nebuchadnezzar. And the source is Babylon and Timbuktu, page 78. Uganda, that's still with Uganda now. It says, by the time of the prophet Zephaniah, about 630 BC, Ethiopia and the adjacent lands of Uganda and Kenya were swarming with black Jews. Zephaniah says, in chapter 3 and 10 again, it says, from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, my suppliants, even the daughter of my dispersed, shall bring my offering. This verse is an indication that the Israelites will be multiplying and making converts among the inhabitants beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. No doubt, this prophet had communication with the Jews in this remote area. The rivers of Ethiopia connect with the Nile water system in the heart of Ethiopia. The Athabasca River extends from the highlands of modern Ethiopia to the Nile. The Blue Nile extends from the direction of Addis Ababa in the northwestern direction toward the Nile. Near Uganda in the northern Congo is the Bahr el Ghazal River. It is 500 miles long in southwest Sudan, formed by the confluence of the Bahr el Arab and Jur rivers. In northwest Upper Nile, it flows east to unite to the Lake Nile with the Bahr el Jebel and form the White Nile. These areas are beyond the rivers of Ethiopia. Moreover, are there any records or oral traditions of the existence of Jewish tribes deeply beyond the rivers of Ethiopia? Joseph J. Williams cites a peculiar case. He said there can be little doubt but that somewhere in the dim past, probably by the way of Abyssinia, a wave of Hebraic culture penetrated to the Lake District of East Africa. If we may credit the following citations, speaking of Uganda to the west of Lake Victoria and northeast of the Belgian Congo, it has an organized native government with a tradition of 33 kings and a legendary line that traces back to King David. It is a proud history. The legends tell of Uganda people crossing the Nile, remember beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, centuries upon centuries ago, and subduing all tribes whose countries they traverse. They claim the highest native civilization in Africa. And the source is Babylon and Timbuktu, page 79 now. Moving on. So let's deal with Philo and Co. now. Let's see what they have to say about Zephaniah 3 and 10 and the dispersed Israelites and the diaspora of the Israelites. It says, the Jewish philosopher Philo, about 40 BC to 40 AD, who lived in Alexandria, Egypt, said, excuse me, that 1 million Jews resided in Libya and Egypt from the Katabatmos to the borders of Ethiopia. Professor A.H. Godby says that Philo leaves us doubtful about which boundaries of Ethiopia he meant. I think that Philo meant the western and southern boundaries of Ethiopia because the prophet Zephaniah mentioned from beyond the rivers of Ethiopia, the daughters of my dispersed. There was a period of over 600 years between Zephaniah and Philo. And considering the new waves of immigrants coming into Africa, they had 600 years to penetrate toward all the borders of Ethiopia. E. Struer wrote that Hebrewism was detachable by its inscriptions from the Egyptian border westward across North Africa to Mauritania. A.H. Godby says Jerome, 310 to 120, one of the four doctors of the church, wrote that Jews were spread from the western extremity of Mauritania to India. Now, the ancient Mauritania included part of the territory on the Atlantic Ocean, Morocco, and part of modern Algeria. It is certain that the Jews had migrated all across North Africa by the 2nd century. Some scholars fix the date earlier than this. So again, all these people, Philo, Saint Jerome, they have a testament, an attestation to the fact that you had black Jews, you had these Israelites that migrated all across North Africa and went to the western tip. That's where Mauritania is, going to the Atlantic Ocean. So when these people question, oh, how you guys Jews, you came from West Africa. You had Jews in West Africa. Dumb. This is what we do in Genesis 49. We say no to vague interpretations to give thorough breakdowns. We cite our sources. Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 84 to 85. Omnipresent. The Jews are omnipresent people. It says the Greek historian and geographer Strabo, 63 to 24 AD, said concerning the Jews of Cyrene, which is Libya. Now, these Jews already have gotten to all cities, and it's hard to find a place in the habitable earth that has not been admitted this tribe of men and is not possessed by it. It has come to pass that Egypt and Cyrene, as having the same governors, and a great many other nations imitate their way of living, maintain great bodies of these Jews in peculiar manner, privileged status, and grow up to greater prosperity with them and make use of the same laws with that nation also. So he's basically pointing out, everywhere you go, you can't escape these Jews. Yeah, we're omnipresent. The Israelites are omnipresent. So why wouldn't we be in West Africa? We migrated all over. And that comes from Babylon and Timbuktu, page 85. So, original Jews. It says after the fall of the Carthaginian metropolis in North Africa, Roman power became dominant in the Barbary states. Under Roman suzerainty and power, the Jews of Asia and North Africa rebelled in 115 AD. The Jews considered themselves numerous enough to challenge Roman authority in the east and the south because of their numbers. The Jews almost subdued their adversaries who had compelled them to suffer many atrocities and indignities. Emperor Trajan sent his general, Turbo, to bring law and order. Instead of bringing law and order, the act of suppression of the insurrection brought massacre. The suppression of rebellion under the slogan of the law and order may be good in principle, but a good thing may be carried too far. So it was in this case. The pagans and the Romans attacked the Jews indiscriminately, both Jewish soldiers and the uninvolved peaceful population without mercy. As a result, this merciless attack, many Jews fled to those parts of northwest Africa known as Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Mauritania. Many other Jews fled to the areas where Rome did not have any jurisdiction. This was the region of the south, the Sahara Desert, and the Sudan. Grazel says such is the explanation of how the Sahara Desert first acquired Jewish tribes toughened by fighting tradition and possessed of physical characteristics, blacks, which it is said still make them approximate very closely to the original Jewish population of Palestine. So these black Jews of the Sahara are connected to the original Jewish population of Palestine. So don't let nobody tell you, oh, you can't be a Jew because you black. You can't be a Jew because you a Negro. You know, they don't have the history, and they're trying to destroy your culture and your identity. It's called ethnocide. They don't want you to connect with your ancient forefathers and foremothers. The source is Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 85 to 86. Now we're going to deal with migration patterns. Joseph J. Williams says, he points out the course of the Jewish migration from northeastern Africa. He writes that Jews migrated up the Nile, passing Memphis, Elephantine, Khartoum, and then they turned west at Kordofan in central Sudan. In the region of the White Nile, Williams thinks some Jews settled in the country of Shilluk in the southern Sudan and Uganda. He continues by tracing the migration from Kordofan going west to Darfur, Lake Chad, Kano, and then to the countries of the Niger River, which that puts you in West Africa, right? Black migration of black Jews to West Africa. The source is Babylon at Timbuktu, page 89. Now we're going to deal with Nigeria. It says the original inhabitants of the Songhai people was Gongia, Kukya, and Kuka. This place was situated in the Dendi country and known as Dendina, lying near the Niger River and the northwestern border of what is now the modern state of Nigeria. Many scholars think that the Songhai people came from Egypt or Ethiopia because there exist many Egyptian cultures complexes among them. For example, the preparation of the dead body for burial. Za-el-Yemeni came from Kuka about 300 AD, an ancient abode of the Songhai tribe. He established a line of kings known as the Za, Dija, or the Dia dynasty. This founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in Western Africa was a black Jew. His name is sometimes written Za al-Ayaman. Joseph J. Williams says that a citizen of Timbuktu named Abderrahim Es-Sadi wrote in 1652 in his book Tariqa Es-Sudan, History of Sudan, that Za al-Ayaman was derived from Diza min el-Yemen, which means he is from Yemen. Za el-Yemeni came to Niger country by the way of Ouaggala in central Algeria. Ouaggala was a great trade center of the black Jews. Dr. Barth and Professor Gabi say that the Za, the founder of the first Jewish dynasty, established his capital later at Gail. And on the eastern upper Niger River, the Arabs, Moors, and the Sudanic writers attribute to the ancient black African Hebrews the establishment of the first empires, the erection of the first public buildings in the country, the construction of the first canals and irrigation systems, and the institution of a social economic regime which still survives in all sub-Saharan communities. And that's Babylon and Timbuktu, page 89. So we learning about who? Za el-Yemeni, who came from Yemen, this Jew, and was the founder of the first Sudanic dynasty in West Africa. Moving on. Now let's deal with the separation and segregation of the Jews and the native African tribes. When I say African, it doesn't automatically denote Hamite, no, because we know Shem, Ham, and Japheth were in Africa. Case in point, Afar, right? The Afari people, the Libyans, they're sons of Shem. They come from Shem. So you had Shemites in Africa as well. You had some Japhites in Africa because along the Mediterranean coast of Africa, different tribes did trade there, so on and so forth, right? So it says the black Jews had an advantage over the African tribes. They carried their culture, history, laws, and written records with them. This assured them a constant precedent for the development of higher social organization. Because of the stability of the black Jewish culture, the Jews were not absorbed into the autocrationist population. In fact, the Jews absorbed some of the native tribes. The Jews made use of every opportunity. They were an industrious and skillful people. In the Jewish Guianan states, were found kings, princes, governors, generals, secretaries, treasurers, revenue agents, judges, architects, engineers, doctors, historians, language interpreters, mathematicians, jewelers, sculptors, masons, carpenters, painters of art, goldsmiths, leatherworkers, potters, armorers, saddlers, blacksmiths, agriculturalists, etc. When are we going to, this video is about Babylon and Timbuktu, but side note, we ought to be ashamed of ourselves, because if our forefathers could do that, we could do that now. That's all I'm going to say. And we do have some great people that are amongst our nation that actually excel in these areas, but we got to step it up. Babylon and Timbuktu, page 90. Ghana. Let's deal with Ghana. It says, concerning the kingdom of Ghana, Joseph William writes, and you don't know who Joseph William, he wrote Hebrewisms of West Africa. It says, whatever may be thought of the more or less mythological traditions connected with the earliest Jews in North Africa, it is now practically an established fact that a Jewish nation, Jewish at least in faith, and perhaps to an origin, long held sway south of the Sahara. It's a fact now, because you can see the evidence of these Jews being in West Africa, being in Ghana, being in Sahara, being in Lam, being in Dahomey, being in Senegal, right? The source is Babylon and Timbuktu, pages 91 to 92. Let's deal with the artifacts. In the 9th century, a black African Hebrew arrived in the city of Cyrene in Algeria, and this city was one of the famous Talmudic schools. The name of this Hebrew was Eldad the Danite. He told a credible story of a Hebrew empire south of the Sahara in the western Sudan. According to Eldad the Danite, the Hebrews in the interior of Africa spoke a Phoenician Hebraic language mixed with Arabic. They had a religion which had come down from Moses and a Hebrew emperor. It was believed that this emperor was named Tulutan or Bolatan. Eldad said that the people of this tribe had fled from the kingdom of Israel after Sennacherib, the Assyrian, had subdued it, and that the other Israelite tribes such as Naphtali, Gad, and Asher were in the land from which he came. He told of the laws of Moses, which they followed, the complete series of the scriptures except Esther and Lamentations. He did not speak of the legal works that were produced in Babylon and Palestine after the destruction of the first temple, of which the Algerian Jews had knowledge. These extraordinary works were the Mishnah and the Talmud. Eldad displayed as evidence some ceremony pertaining to the slaughtering of animals for food. It was written in Hebrew and with an Arabic tinge, but Eldad claimed that he knew no other language than Hebrew. In regard to Eldad's story, the Gaon, head of the Jews, assured the people that the story was credible. We are grateful for the travels and researches of Nahum Sluch, who wrote in the early part of the 20th century. He said, for many years, the author of this book, having gathered material for a history of the Jewish migrations into the Sahara and the Sudan. One part of his work is already done, the establishment of the authenticity of these migrations. To the writing of the Arabs and the oral traditions of the country, he can now add archaeological evidence furnished by the ruins of ancient Jewish cities in the Sahara and the Sudan, and the documentary evidence of the Hebrew inscriptions like those of Tuat, which date from the 13th and 14th centuries. So again, we have the artifacts, we have the archaeology, we can see these things. These things were discovered. We know that the Jews and the Israelites were in these parts of the world, in the Sahara, in the Sudan, in West Africa. And that source is Babylon to Timbuktu, pages 92 to 93. Jewish Moors. It says, in less than 100 years, the black Arabs had pushed their way completely across North Africa in the 7th century. At this time, the Arabs were black. They had not mixed much. They had not mixed much with other people. The Arabs did penetrate into the interior of the Sahara Desert, but only in small numbers, so that the territory remained basically African. Mulai Idris, the descendant of Ali, the son-in-law of Muhammad, brought northern Morocco under his control late in the 7th century. His son and successor was Idris II, who founded the Kingdom of Fez. At this time in the land of Spain, the black Jews were persecuted and many had fled to Morocco for refuge. As a result of this persecution, the Jews of Morocco and the Moors planned to invade Spain with the assistance of Spanish Jews. In the meantime, the plot was uncovered and the Jews of Spain suffered for their intentions. Early in the 8th century, the Mohammedans from Morocco united with the black Jews and made what we call the amphibious landing at Gibraltar. This invasion was successful. Nahum Sluse says that the first one to set foot on the soil of Spain was General Tarif, a Jew of the tribe of Simeon, after whom the island of Tarifa. So when you deal with Moors, you're dealing with Jews, man. They've just been Islamicized. They've just been Islamicized. They follow the Islamic way, but they're racially Jews, racially Israelites. It says, after whom the island of Tarifa, opposite of Tangiers, was named. However, the rock of Gibraltar, previously known as the Pillars of Hercules, received its new name from the great Moorish conqueror, Jabal al-Tariq, which means the mountain of Tariq. Here is the vivid account of the conquering Moors described by the writer who sympathized with Christian Spain. The reins of their horses were as fire, their faces black as pitch. So there's no question. This historian said their faces were black as pitch. You're dealing with melanated black people, people of color. So these Moors, which are Jews, were black. It's undisputed. So the eyes shone like the burning candles, the horses were swift as leopards, and the riders fiercer than a wolf in a sheepfold at night. The noble Goths were broken in an hour, quicker than tongue can tell. O luckless Spain. Source, Babylon of Timbuktu, page 109. So the Moors are nothing but Jews. They're nothing but Jews that have absorbed and made Islam their belief. Now let's deal with the Prince of the Jews. This is Samuel ibn Nagdela. Lives from 993 to 1056. He started out as a grocer. Another humble beginning. He started out as a grocer. His acquisition of knowledge in the languages, mathematics, and philosophy was extraordinary because Samuel had a beautiful handwriting. He was appointed secretary of the Grand Vizier. In this position, he was able to put to good use his wisdom and knowledge. When the vizier died, Samuel succeeded him as advisor to the Moorish king of Granada. On several occasions, he was appointed as the head of the Moorish armies of Granada. Samuel ibn Nagdela was respected also in the Jewish circles. The king of Granada elevated him to the position of Nagid, that is, prince or leader of the Jews. And this is source Babylon of Timbuktu, page 115. I have another source to back up this source. It says, Latinization of Arab names are used whenever possible. Names of monarchs are avoided whenever possible because it is assumed that they are too difficult for the reader to easily keep track of, because the author cannot. Therefore, instead of reading of Isaac al-Bursali, you will read the King of Carmona. If this approach were not adopted, there would be over 50 hard to remember Arabic names to keep track of. A problem also occurs with the transliteration of the name Nagrela. There are many different spellings of the name, from the common Nagrela to the Arabic sounding Nagrilla or Nagrala. I choose Nagrela. In Spanish, it means little black one. So his surname meant little black one. So if I had to take a guess on what Samuel ibn Nagdela looked like, I would guess he's a person of color. He's a black man, quote unquote. If this transliteration is correct, then the subject of this essay could trace his family origins to the Christian half of Spain. True or not, the only certainty concerning the spelling of Nagrela is its unimportance. The Life and Times of Samuel ibn Nagrela by Robert M. Rothman, page 6. So his last name denotes little black one, or little black ones, since it's a family. His whole family, his whole line were little black ones. They were dark skinned. So this is when the colorists go into the comment board and try to rebut this. It's irrefutable. We have the information. We have the evidence. Genesis 49, y'all know how we do. We say no to vague interpretations. We give what? Thorough breakdowns. So we're dealing with the Negroid Jews. Negroid Jews. Negroid Jews. It says, considering all this intermingling, many Jews of North Africa still retain much of their colored features. According to Maurice Fishberg, who was quoted by Alan Godby, he was unable to distinguish a Jew from a Mohammedan while passing along the streets of Algiers, Constantine, a city of Northern Africa, and Tunis. It is remarkable that among the non-Jewish natives there are seen many Jews of Negroid type. Many Jews of Negroid type, this early 20th century, in the 1900s, when he did this voyage. Maurice Fishberg was an Ashkenazi Jew. He went to these countries where he heard Jews were, and he seen this thing. He wrote down what he saw. Fishberg visited Africa during the early part of the 20th century. There are black Jews living in a multitude of oases in the Sahara Desert. Nahum Sloots, the white Jewish rabbi, visited these Jews in North Africa and the Sahara during the turn of this century. Sloots obtained his information of these Jews from three sources: from the historical records of the Arabs, from the oral traditions of the inhabitants of the Sahara, from the archaeological evidence excavated from the ruins of old Jewish cities in the Sahara and Sudan, which date from the 13th century. About halfway down in the eastern border of Algeria, there are large settlements of black Jews at a place called Ouargla, says Sloots. Jews were at Ouargla as early as 620 AD, according to Gabi. Again, Gabi says in Ouargla oasis of Algeria, 350 miles from the Mediterranean, is a colony of Jews as black as Negroes. So again, anybody trying to say that, oh, you can't be a Jew or Israelite because you black. Wait a minute, these Jews black. The ancient Jews black. The ancient Israelites black. What are we doing? What are we talking about? Babylon Timbuktu, page 118 is the source. Islamic Jews. Now let's deal with the Islamic Jews. It says, on the occasion, Sloots met a Jewish a merchant of Nefusa who had just arrived from Fezant. This Jew had traveled all the routes of Sahara. He assured Sloots that other Jews existed at least in the East Sudan, Chad, Sudan, and Ethiopia, a black-skinned population which some called the Felici, and which are generally known among the Tuaregs as the Krit. They observe the Sabbath and are known to be of Jewish origin. Many of the tribes in the Sahara and in the Sudan are Muslims in religion, but are Hebrew in nationality. Nahum Sloots says numbers of these Islamized Jews may be found everywhere. They are among the nomads of Algeria and Smul, the Hanasha, the Triras, the Mazmara, the Maharin, the Kabylis, and the Tuat. You will find among them the Uresfana, the Garania, the Brahmi, and Tripoli. You will find them in southern Morocco among the powerful clans of the Dagatuns who control the routes of the Sahara and southward. They are non-Jewish by religion, but aware of their Hebrew origin. That's what we brought out about the Moors. They wasn't following Judaism or the faith or commandments, but they were following the Islamic regime. And they understood that. Well, we're Israelites, but this is what we follow. A lot of them were forced to become Muslims, and then it becomes a generational thing. They pass it down to their children pass it. You understand? And after 1,000 years, all we know is Islam. Even though, we was always told we come from the Israelites, the Israelite stock. They say they are friendly to the Jewish merchants. Frequently, the Jew is the only communication between these tribes and the outside world. And the source is Babylon Timbuktu, page 119 and 120. Not remembered. It says, thus, Nahum, and again, when I open this up, talking about the terminology African, that was used so we wouldn't be remembered, that we may be no more in remembrance, man. Our name get blotted out of the earth. It says, thus Nahum Sloots said this about the Islamicized Jews he met. In most cases, the Hebrews by race and Muslim men by faith seek to hide their origin, which has become a burden to them. In another example, the persecution of the black Jews in Portugal was so ruthless and frequent that Cecil Roth tells us that the Jews did not divulge to their children the secret of their religion until they had attained the age of reason. The Hebrew religion is such that if you deny your religion, you will eventually deny your nationality. That's what happened here in the Americas. We had no chance to come back to our roots, and now when we tell you guys, hey, you an Israelite, oh, I don't believe it, I'm an African. You deny your nationality. You deny it. You're an Israelite, man. You blacks, Hispanics, and Native Americans are the Israelites the Bible speaks of, but you deny it because you have no insight on your culture that has been robbed and deprived of you, deprived from you. It's the sociologists and psychologists know, and the history has proven that if you deny your culture and nationality over a long period of time, you will totally forget it through a process of assimilation. Is that not what happened to the American Negro? Is that not what happened to the quote unquote Hispanic, the Native American man and woman and child? It said, it is written, they have said, come and let us cut off them from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in their remembrance. And that's Psalms 83:4. The source is Babylon of Timbuktu, page 123. I didn't basically sent y'all on a cruise ship through this whole book. You understand? Took me about an hour and some change, but I gave you a cruise ship through this book, gave you the highlights. Got a few more to go. Now let's deal with the B'nai Ephraim. B'nai means sons. It says there are black Jews in southern Nigeria who are called the Imo Yokwam, or strange people, by the native Africans. But these black Jews call themselves by the Hebrew name B'nai Ephraim, or sons of Ephraim. These Jews claim their ancestors immigrated from Morocco, a fact which Gabi says is supported by their language, a mixture of Maghrebi, Arabic, and local Negro speech. Thus, Ubu means father, has become Yaba. Mother, Hebrew, is Ima. Nevertheless, most of their language is similar to the black Yorubas around them. The Yorubas have influenced these Jews to a great extent in their external social life. It is said that the crocodile is a sacred animal for all. The customary sacrifices of the Yorubas appear to be the same for the Jews. The assertion of these Yoruba Jews is that their ancestors were driven from a locality to locality by Muslim persecution. They did not find rest even when they arrived at Timbuktu. Surely the prophecy has been fulfilled, and among these nations shalt thou find no ease. Neither shall the sole of thy foot have rest, but the Lord shall give thee there a trembling heart and failing of eyes and sorrow of mind. And that's quoted Deuteronomy 28, of course. It says, these Yoruba Jews lived in the Ondo district when Gabi wrote in 1980. This district is 900 miles southeast of Timbuktu. When Gabi wrote, they numbered about 2,000 people in 20 small hamlets. And the source is Babylon of Timbuktu, page 131 to 132. And we're at the end, Omega, right? Now for the Omega. I appreciate everybody who watched this thing from the beginning all the way to the end. I appreciate you, brothers and sisters, for subscribing, liking my videos, and following the channel. Let's get this video out here. Share the video on the social media platforms such as Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Let's get it out there, because we're trying to wake up the 12 tribes that are scattered in the four corners of the earth. And our people got to hear this, because this African thing has become a religion amongst our people. It's really theology. It's like, it's very religious to be attached to that African terminology and that classification system. When we have our history, we have our culture, we see who we are, we have the evidence, we brought the sources. Now it's up to you to choose between evil and good. It's up to you to choose to continue to be a zombie and walk in the congregation of the dead, or come to life and wake up and put on that flesh, pursuant to Ezekiel when it says the valley of dry bones. Right now, you're a dry bone. You don't have any nutrients. You don't have anybody feeding you. But we here at Genesis 49ers, we're here to feed you with the truth, with the understanding and the history, so you can get your culture and your identity back. The picture that you see on the screen is from the Lost Tribes, a myth by Alan H. Gabi, page 257. And on this map, in Algeria, the part where it says Ouargla, around here, it says black Jews. With that, I'm going to conclude the lesson. If you agree with the video, have any questions, just type it in the comment section below the video. Share the video, like the video. If you haven't subscribed yet, subscribe. Genesis 49ers signing off.